Well, hello. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
Good. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. I think both of us with clients and getting through our respective projects.
Yep. Yep. And the AI assessment that we've worked on and launched that I'm super excited about
I know.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, a lot going on. So it's been a while since it's just been the two of us on the podcast.
It has been.
Usually we have these great guests. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time, just the two of us today.
That's scary. Scary. But I'm super excited because I feel like we also have permission to go into the detail that we usually don't have time for. So I'm
Yeah.
particularly excited because I have a whole list of questions to ask you. They're sitting on my screen in front of me that are basically interview questions of, "Hey, Rich, so I know we talked about this like on the fly, but now I never get through to the point of, so what'd you actually do and what was the
Right.
outcome?" We tend to talk in the middle, the messy middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So today we want to focus on AI enterprise projects that fail, not because the
hmm
tech doesn't work, because the tech is really amazing, but like most transformation projects, nothing to do with the tool.
Right. Right. And it's funny because I think that, and I know we'll get into this, but the more I have conversations about AI, the more we talk about what success looks like. The more I'm convinced you could take the technology out of it, or you could put any technology in, as we've always seen, and it's the same problem. People process.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The projects fail 6 months in. Nobody's using it, maybe. They recognize their data is not ready for prime time.
Yeah. Big deal.
And and then I think you get to the point too where everybody was rah jazzed about it, and now it's work. Now it's work.
Right.
The interest tends to wane. We know the longer projects roll on, the harder it is to keep sustained interest in it. And so, I think the big thing is if you've got an AI pilot that's sitting right now, and it maybe is collecting dust, you're in
Right.
good company. You're in good
Right,
company.
right. Yeah, because I think a lot of people are there. And I think that it's funny. I always look at these technology revolutions as it comes with such excitement. And the excitement is always based on the technology, which is tangible, right? People can touch it, they can feel it. But I think people are still missing the central point of any transformation, which is you're ultimately changing the way you work, the way your business operates. And I think traditionally up until AI, we've seen transformations. I was just on with a client and we had this slide where we showed, a beeper to the cell phone, and what the future looks like is really about mining intelligence, right? If we think about AI and where AI is going and all the kind of narratives that have been coming out, it's really about how do you mine intelligence, and not intelligence just from the computer or from the AI, but how do you mine intelligence from your organization in a different way. And so I think it's funny because we've seen these evolutions, and Salesforce used to have this, really cool slide where it'd show, kind of arrow going up, and it's like the first industrial revolution, the second and kind of defining their milestones as a company, which was, always in the kickoff and always part of the, you know, presentations that we'd have to give to clients. But what I've been saying to clients is, I said, I think this is the first time we've reached a technology that actually can do what you really want it to do with very limited limitations. And what I mean by that is, if we think about, I use this example all the time, 360 degree of the customer. How many years have we been saying that? 10,
Absolutely.
15? Oh,
Exactly.
we're going to give you the 360-degree view of the
Right,
customer.
right. With all the windows, all the prisms into the 360.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it never worked. It never really came to fruition because you had to build the dashboards. You had to mine the data. The data sat in multiple systems, and whatever system you use, whether it was Oracle or HubSpot or Salesforce, you name it, it never could really ingest that data in a way that really ever gave you that, right? Without a lot
And
of
that gives you the
effort.
intelligence. I mean, to your
Right.
earlier point, like it's the intelligence we want.
Right. And now we're getting to the point where you can just ask the AI questions about the data. You don't have to visualize it anymore, right? I mean, Ashley, who we had on the pod a couple of months ago, her take as a CIO is like, I want to get to the point where I don't need a dashboard. I want to get to the point where people just ask what they want of the data. And I think that's where we're moving. And when we talk about intelligence, it's I want to have a conversation with my data. I don't want to have a relationship that depends on me flipping down a drop down, waiting for it to circle and, update and give me another thing and
And then
still
turn
not
it
have the
sideways
context.
and yeah, exactly.
And then take a picture of it and put it in a presentation and then put all the bullet points next to that to bring into a meeting, and everyone's still not going to understand what you're telling them.
Well,
So,
today I think we want to talk a little bit about our framework. So, 3 phases. How do you deal with all of this? How are we dealing with it? How are we seeing things work best for our clients? So, the 3 phases: design, deploy, amplify. That sound really, really easy, but when you've got a disciplined approach to each of those areas, I think that's where we're seeing where we've got projects that are on track, that are succeeding, that are really reaching their goals, versus the ones that we might be brought in to fix, or the ones where we've got some basic pillars. If they're not met, then we can't get to that next deploy and that next
right.
amplify stage. So let's split hairs on this.
Yeah, let's do it. And I think when we talk about frameworks, I wanna kind of say everybody has a framework or a thought around a framework. I think frameworks help us as people and organizations anchor ourselves to your point of where we are and where we're going, right? And I always think about the sum of its parts. So there are different phases that we're going to go through with each of the framework stages. And often what people do is and I know you can appreciate this with the project you're working on, is often they forget about things like change management until they're 9 months into a year project. Or, hey, we never really sat and talked to that stakeholder, or we didn't define those risks really well. And so I think what frameworks help us do is it's a safety net to help you remember that any project that's worth doing is worth doing right. And I think people get wrapped around when you present a really heavy framework, well, that's a lot of work. Well, moving your company forward is a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And doing it right and
Change is really, it's a lot of work to get people to change. Even if it makes their job infinitely easier, there's still work involved in that.
right. And I think the point is we're at an inflection point that, as employees are feeling vulnerable, that this technology is going to take away our jobs. And there is this notion that every time you open, a news article, it's Meta's laying off, Salesforce is laying off, go down the list. And we just, in talking to Jim McCoy last week on the podcast, he was talking a lot about reskilling, which I don't think there's enough positive messages going out about AI. And I think that the framework, when used properly, addresses those issues. So if you think about your workforce, think about it as a reskilling opportunity, not as a laying off opportunity. And there are things that we had hoped for years that our technology would have done, which is take the easy, repeatable tasks and get rid of them, have them done by the computer. We never really got there because the technology hasn't ever really supported it without us customizing it. And customization takes time, customization costs money, and
And now
ultimately,
I got an ROI question.
right, right.
Right.
So I think the AI is just collapsing those barriers in a rapid pace that we've never seen before, which is great, but it then comes up with a lot of other challenges. And so I think the framework is our attempt to help people think through the problem and solve the problem that's in front of them and move through this process in a more rigorous manner that helps them achieve the outcome that they want.
Agreed. Let's jump into it. AI pilots. Let's start with the pilot. Why do they fail?
So I've seen this a couple of different ways. So one, I think that people have or companies have subscribed to the big LLMs, OpenAI, Claude, Copilot, and they turn it on and say, "Go use it." There's little instruction. There's little defined outcome of what that looks like and what good looks like. And so in the instance of one client we worked with had just went and built custom GPTs to solve problems. Each department was just going through it. They got to the point where they had 1,200, somewhere up in the realm of 2,000 custom GPTs, more
Which could be
than
amazing success on one hand.
could be. It shows innovation and it shows drive and it shows interest and willingness to lean in
Yep.
to the
Yeah.
new
All good
way of
things.
working.
But
All all good things, but most of them weren't active. And then when we started digging in, particularly this example with the marketing department is like, oh, great. Well, this GPT does this. And I upload data here and I download a PDF and I put this over here. Your head starts spinning because you're like, you forgot the most important piece is that this is a workflow. And you are still so in the middle of this workflow, which is completely contradictory. And the question we just asked, why don't we just hook it up to the data sources? Oh, I didn't know we could do that. So it just tells a story around this company was very anxious to get it in the hands of their employees. And they felt like democratization of the technology was the key. But I think what many companies are finding out is that the democratization of the technology without some sort of anchor, which is the data, it doesn't help, right? So it may help me individually with my task and may be more successful at getting my task done. But if you have 7 BDRs, let's just say for the sake of argument, and they're all using that AI differently, and they may all be getting through the tasks, but are they really accomplishing your goal? Are you really getting the outcome? And the question you said before is, are we getting the ROI for our investment? Now, in this instance, I'd say, no, you're not.
in spite of all these really good things, but again, it's anchoring in the reality, which is what's the success we're looking for? How do we define that? Everybody has the same definition and the same marching orders. And then do we have our data structured? And I think that's a big one is your
Huge.
data ready for AI?
Well, and let's face it, most people will say no, right? I mean, most people will say that their data is not in a position to accept it. And a lot of that goes back to, defining where data originates. And so I think this was a really interesting point a CIO made is she did a presentation to her colleagues and said, everybody says we have a data problem and you point to IT. But let's look at the schematic. Who's putting data into Salesforce? Sales. Who's putting data into Marketo? Marketing. Who's putting data into,
Right,
right?
right,
And it's
right.
not about pointing fingers, but data is poor because it's originated bad, right? Somebody puts it in, an individual puts it in, and that's the start of the data. Now, as it moves through the system, it may get manipulated, which
Right, right.
could be
Could get cleaned
a
up. Great.
right,
Excellent. But again, somebody's got accountability for that data
right.
quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Most organizations won't stand up. There was a a meme I saw today. I don't know if you remember the old movie Usual Suspects, but it was a picture of the usual, all the actors against the board, and,
Huh?
when you do a lineup.
Right.
And says salespeople willing to go to jail before they'll fill out your CRM. Right?
Any company in the world.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
Right? So, I mean, it's the thing they'll avoid the most. And so then when you talk about, well, why am I missing email addresses? Why am I missing phone now? Why is this information not updated? Because somebody didn't take the time to put it in because it wasn't important to them. But
Or take advantage of those tool sets, because now that is one of the great things that I do love about some of the AI that's coming in tool is it makes it really easy. There are no excuses because it is almost done for you. It's just validate, 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 which is exceptional. Somebody still needs to own who owns data quality and
mhm,
then who owns process in order to
right.
enforce adoption. Period. End of
Well, and it's
discussion.
that dirty word governance, right? There has to be some oversight because I think the one thing everybody can agree to is that AI will give you answers quickly, but what most people are realizing is if I have poor data, then I am getting really bad answers quickly, right? And if you're somebody, I think there's different people within organizations that can look at numbers or look at a set of data that they get aggregated and immediately call bullshit on it, right? They know their business so well that they're like, that can't possibly be how much we made this quarter.
Right.
Like we never make that much
Right.
this quarter.
Right.
yeah, we hooked it up to the wrong data set,
Yeah.
or it
Yeah.
calculated something wrong. So I think that there's a group of people who can do that. There's a whole group of people who can't. So they're going to trust what comes out of that AI and not question it, which is part of the problem with AI is the hallucinations and not understanding that source system and how good that source system is really going to be detrimental.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I completely agree with. But it's also, okay, at the pilot, what's your success criteria?
Right.
Who's validating that?
Right.
Because it is so critical that we get that right. What is a simple test that you can apply today to a project, or you can walk in to figure out whether the pilot you're working on becomes a success story or a statistic? What are the telltale signs you look for?
So the first thing I'd look for, and I think you just alluded to it, is what's the success criteria. So no matter what project we're working on, whether it's AI or not, it's the first question we ask because I think that it's very telling when you sit down with leadership and you ask that question and nobody can answer it. So let's just argue that you want to deflect calls in a support, right? Success and support. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean you're trying to improve your customer satisfaction scores because you don't have enough employees to take the calls and da da da? Is it that you want more deflection so your customer gets the answer quicker and they move on and your reps aren't saddled with answering yes, you just turn it off and turn it back on, or whatever the answer is that takes 2 seconds and the case opens and closes, right? Or hey, what's the status of my case, right? So you think of the simple things. So I think if you can't even define those metrics, then that's a problem. The second thing from those metrics, I'd say, can you benchmark them and measure them over time? Because that's the next thing is I've talked to a lot of customers who say, oh, well, we want to measure growth. Okay. What does that mean? What is the metric that measures growth? I'm not sure. Okay. So let's say we get to the metric. Okay. Can you benchmark that today? Our data is not that great. And these are conversations I hear every day, all day.
Absolutely. Or I can't trace it back to
Hmm.
a single factor that
Right.
would cause an up or a down,
Right.
which is also a challenge.
So I would immediately be suspect of anything, any pilot, POC, project that you can't understand the outcome you're trying to get, baseline that outcome, and then have a clear path forward. Because at times, I feel like what happens with these programs is somebody makes a decision, I want to replace my CRM. Great. Why? It's not working. Okay. Why? Now, no one ever talks about adoption, which is the first question that should be out of every consultant's mouth is, well, how's your adoption? Well, it's really poor. Well, why? They don't like the system. Okay. Why don't they like the system? We don't know. We're working on this MDM vendor selection project. And one of the questions we asked all the participants in the survey was, what's your confidence in the data? Now, most participants gave it an 8 or 9. So you're telling me the data is great, but the problem is you can't use the data in its current form. So you don't have a data quality problem. You have a data access and mining problem, which is completely different, right?
Right. Yep.
If they said, well, every time I pull the data, it's wrong, well, then we have an input issue, as we talked about before. We have a different set of issues. What we have here is a governance issue. We have a definition issue. We have a semantic layer issue, right? Like there's different issues. And so I think before they get into these programs, especially technology programs, if you don't understand really where the business's mindset is and you don't understand where you're going ultimately, so what does it look like 6 months after I launch, 9 months after I launch, a year after I launch, then I don't know that anybody's really clued into the reason they're doing it beyond the technology.
100%. Well, and I think when we talk about this, we're talking about, okay, first of all, what's my success criteria? And then second of all, what's my alignment on that? And I think one of the things about alignment is, everybody thinks alignment is, yeah, hey, we're on the same team. And in my mind, alignment is not a meeting that resolves in a single slide and everybody smiling and walking out, because frankly, there better be some black eyes coming out of that meeting before we get to alignment. Otherwise, I don't trust it. Because at the end of the day, somebody, sales wants speed in what they're doing, and finance doesn't want to pay, and ops wants control, and we've seen this play before. So I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of it is get to alignment that really comes down to not just what are we trying to do, and to your point, what are we trying to do on day one? What does it look
Hmm.
like after that?
Yeah.
But also, who's accountable for the different steps on that? And I think that's one of the big ones, is defining that before you even get started. Who's
Right.
accountable for what?
Well, what you always say, what does day two look like, right?
Right.
Day
Right.
one's launch, what is day two? Because day two is operationalization, easy for me to say, of the project, right?
Yeah.
This is where the rubber hits the road. And I think, and I know that's phase three, but operationalizing, why can't I say that word today? Operationalizing I'm just gonna give up right now. The product or the new way of working is all that matters, right? And
It
putting
is.
it into a rhythm of the business is really what you're ultimately getting at.
Yeah, agreed. And then I think the other thing that comes out of that is there is agreement that at the bottom line, at the end of the day, there's one executive who owns the outcome for that. Everybody else
Right.
agrees, and they agree to the change that's coming into it, and they may have pieces of that, but we've got one person who owns that outcome.
Well, and that's interesting because if we think of our framework in the design, we talk about strategy and vision. And I think that's a good point you're bringing up because I don't think often there's one executive who is anointed from, let's say, the CEO that says you own this initiative and I expect that your counterparts or your peers will support you in that. And what does that look like? I would agree. I think that there is a problem at the leadership level in defining these programs. And partly because I think for years people operate in their silo. And we talk about this constantly, and we talk about this with the customers constantly. It's about connecting the dots and working outside the silos. Um, Jim's company, who we're working with for the Vibe Fest, one of the things we did in the kickoff to the ELT and the SLT was, guys, this is a new way of working. We're going to work in this connected environment, and this is about everybody in the company connecting to everybody else in the company because we're going to consume data across every facet of the company to get to the answers we need to get to and to drive the customer experience we're trying to drive. And so I think that's an important point with AI that I haven't seen in technology programs before is if you think about when you implement a CRM, it's typically focused on sales and operations, right? Go to market operation. That's usually who's in there. But marketing has a play in there. Success has a play in there. Finance has a play in there. But they're usually at the table as a secondary partner.
Right.
If you now think of the customer journey and you think of AI and you think of marketing and like just the go to market space, marketing, sales, and success, why wouldn't I now give sales access to an entire breadth of this customer, the true 360? They're currently in 3 marketing campaigns. They've currently have six support tickets open. Call the support desk 3,000 times. They have a customer success meeting coming up, like whatever it is, right? So now I know as a sales rep, when I call that person is what's kind of going to be their mood? What's their sentiment, which we always talk about, but we never have been able to
Right.
get to. But now we can not only take that data and level set it, but I, as a sales rep, can say, what's going on with my customer? As simple as that. And the prompt behind it can give you back all that information real time
Right. Right.
from multiple data sources. And I don't have to tell it to go here, here, and here. I just have to say, here are all the data sources, go figure it out.
Right.
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 So we've never been able to do that before. So now I would say then what's in best interest of marketing is in the best interest of sales is in the best interest of CS, right? And it's a completely different playing field than I think we've ever seen before.
Agreed. And I love that because, yeah, it is. It talks to the silos, or breaking down the silos that we've
Totally.
always talked about. One of the things that when people are picking their pilots, one of the things that you and I have talked about is that the best use cases don't always come from strategy. So you're in a really cool position to be working on. This is a strategy. We are building a new product. Most people are not in that luxurious position, or they just haven't gotten their heads wrapped around it yet. But one of the things that you and I have talked about is the best cases come from frustration. And I think that what you've said from, from the sales perspective, like that's exactly where the best use cases are from. Everybody recognizes what that pain point looks like. And
Well,
so how do we address that?
it's like what Bart always says. What do you yell at your wife or husband about when you go home
Yeah.
at night? That's your
Not yell at them.
that's
What do
your
you
pain
vent
point.
to them? What do you
Vent,
vent?
vent.
What do
Yeah.
you vent about?
Sorry. Yeah. It makes it sound like you're blaming your spouse for your work.
I was going to say,
Yeah. I just misspoke there. Yeah, but the venting, right? And so it's funny when I was doing interviews for this project, that was the last question I asked. So when you go home and you vent, like what do you vent about it? Because if you haven't told me that, that's what I want to know. And everyone stopped and they're like, huh, a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you take that frustration with you. And to your point, frustration is really where the friction is, right? If and when we talk about AI, this is what I say to people. I say, if you say, if I have to generate an invoice one more time, I'm literally going to jump off the 32nd floor
Right.
of this
Right.
building. Like, what are those things that you do that you don't have to do? Right? That's the first place you start with, when we think about the conversation with Rena, the jobs to be done, right? So, what are those jobs you do that you really don't need to do, right?
Yeah. Prime candidate. Prime
Prime
candidate.
candidate.
Yeah. 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 So then you've got your list of things, and so now we need to prioritize.
Hmm.
So we go through the prioritize. Okay, so maybe there is the ROI modeling.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty
Win
basic.
wins. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep. Your quick wins versus your investment pieces. It
Hmm.
helps build your one of the things that we've talked about is as you're going through that checklist of which ones do I do, a lot of times we miss change management. Which of these potential pilots require the most change management? And I think that's a surprise to people is sometimes changing internal processes turns into a huge juggernaut. And so I would say just, as you're looking at your ROI, your quick wins, look at your change management because that needs to have a high, medium, low scale as
Right.
well.
Yeah. And I think as we've gone through use case prioritization prior, you're absolutely right. There has to be factors. And, the reason we built the AI assessment we did on the website was that it comes into different factors. And I think you can use this as a repeatable framework through multiple stages, right? So our assessment was designed to figure out where to start and where you were as an organization. I think when you go through use case prioritization, to your point, there is a weighting scale. So, what is the ROI benefit I get? What is the change management? How much does this take to do in effort, right? Is this a large effort from an IT perspective? Is there a customer impact, right? Like if you think of these points, and we've done this with clients before, is that then becomes another weighting to say, well, this use case on paper seems really, really valuable. But to your point, there's the quick wins, there's the, I would say like medium, and then there's the investment. And to me,
The
the
strategic
investment are
investments.
the longer term strategic. There is the quick wins, which to me are getting your feet wet, hitting the low hanging fruit, automating some things. But there's an important thing you said in terms of automation is without really impacting the existing process, right? That's going to be something that a quick win kind of integrates seamlessly, right? The investment is where that process is probably going to be ripped apart and stitched back together, right? And I think to the point we were talking about is I think that's where your company now starts to look different. That's where you start talking about in this framework and prioritization where you're talking about reskilling,
Right. Right.
and you're talking about how departments connect differently and how the data is used differently. So the prioritization has its own kind of, thread that kind of connects it around these points that drive, I thought this was going to be a slam dunk use case,
Right. Right.
but I literally have to change everything about how my customer interacts or
Soup to
everything the
nuts.
way these
Everything is
employees work,
changing.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really, if you don't do that, kind of going back to the beginning of the conversation, you're going to have a failed pilot.
That's exactly right. And I think to your point, where you build a whole bunch of GPTs, I mean, this, it's a slightly different when you're looking at some large scale strategic projects. But the last thing you want is we've built 1,000 GPTs and we've got
Right.
zero adoption. And
Right.
so I think that's just something that people really need to account for
Well,
as
I
part of
equate
their
it to
transformations.
like how individuals are using AI, right? So you in your personal life maybe go into ChatGPT and people are treating it like Google,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's the new Google. And I will
Right.
say I was doing some vendor analysis and I used Claude to do some research. And then I looked at Google, and the research on Google was different than what Claude gave me, and Google was more relevant than Claude. So I think there's still hallucinations. Still think that people need to understand that these models, although rapidly developing, still have gaps and holes in them. And
And
you have to validate
validate
that.
against a primary source. I mean, you
Right.
still, all of it.
Get Encyclopedia Britannica out and make
I
sure.
mean, yeah, absolutely. From 1980, how would it possibly be outdated?
How could it possibly be wrong? I might go back to selling them.
Nice. So we've talked through design. Let's talk through execute, because this is where I think most of the teams really get this is the humbling experience, right?
Right.
Okay, great. Put your money where your mouth is. Let's get this built and shipped, right?
Yeah. I think that so I equate this, and I think of this as any other true development life cycle, right? So you're going to have a solution architecture, you're going to have a design. Those things really don't change in my mind. I think they become more iterative, and I think they become quicker. And I think that's just because of the nature of the fact you can build an entire application in some cases in a matter of minutes, hours, depending on the complexity, right? Or you could at least have a really strong POC quickly, right? That starts validating. So I think that although the nature of the solution architecture is still a significant piece of work, and I think the reason I feel that way, and I think it will change, is from an IT perspective. And we always talk about, you know, when you put on the IT hat, it's a different lens than when you put on the business hat. And the IT hat has to deal with technical debt. And it's an unpopular statement, and the business doesn't like to hear that, but you have made investments over the years. You've invested in Salesforce, you've invested in a marketing system, a sales system, a recording, call recording, name all the different technologies. Some customers have 15 to 16, enterprises could have 230, 400 systems. So now you have all this technical debt. All those systems are generating data. So now when you say, hey, now we're going to create this new thing and it's all going to live here. Okay, great. So then what happens with all this stuff? How do we get off it? Again, back to change management. Do we just shut it off and start using this? Does the data move to our warehouse? Has it always been in our warehouse? Like, all these decisions that IT needs to make around this architecture is critical. And it's not just about the future state. It's, what do I do with legacy? What do I do with the technical debt? And in some cases, this is an amazing opportunity for companies to save a ton of money, right? Let's retire a whole bunch of legacy systems we don't need anymore. But it takes a while to kind of make that transition. And so in this design and architecture space, I think it's incumbent on the CIO and the technical team to not only talk about, well, what does the future look like and how rapidly can we create that future? But how do we now ramp down everything? And in the middle of all this, you have to deal with compliance, legal, regulatory, right? There, GDPR and layer all the complexity on top of it.
Right.
So I think this step is still very traditional to the life cycle of any development, but I think it's also, you can get to an answer really really quickly and fail really quickly in a way you've never could before. So I think
Right.
there's like a trade-off here, whereas I'm going to show you the future really quickly, but it may take me, 3 months to get to that to finalize it. But if you think about it, traditionally it would have taken you 9, 12, maybe a
That's
year and a
exactly
half.
right. Yep. Yep.
So the time is shorter in this phase to ship something, but there's still a lot to consider.
There is, and I think you're right, because the proof of concept, you can build that really, really easily.
Really, really
But
easy.
it could be that you are pulling, a sample of data. You're not pulling the entire thing, and you're not looking to under the covers to say, okay, is it clean? We've talked about if it's not clean enough for me as a business user to trust the data, stop with the AI right now, because you got to clean that up. If it's not good enough for a human, it's not good enough for AI. So,
Right.
so trust that.
Well,
But
and I
to
think
your
it's
point,
something.
go through the cycle first of what's the architecture look like? What is the unglamorous, data into all of the data sources to get very real about what can we build on for scaling.
Right. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier around change management and process and making sure that, you understand how this is going to work. Because at the end of the day, I don't think this is consistent, but I've seen is we're going to put this in and then we don't need these employees anymore, like as an example. And I think it's a quick to judge around those things. Whereas to your point is, yeah, but you haven't even validated that the data is right. You haven't validated that the process works, and you haven't validated all these other things. And the reality is what the AI doesn't know is everything you do as a person to circumvent a problem from happening, right? And I'll give an example of an invoicing group. A lot of times, if a company is a billing department is working through invoices, there's going to be people in the department who understand the ins and outs of different
Yes,
companies that are invoicing. And they'll be like, oh, ABC company, you better hold that because I know that's going to be a problem.
exactly.
But that's because, the sales rep called or somebody called or product called. Somebody intervened and said, hey, like there's an exception to the rule here. And I, as a person, have judgment to make that. When you take that judgment away and you depend on the AI to make it, either you need to explicitly say or have a process that I can call as a salesperson and circumvent that AI process. We're not there yet because we as people are not there yet. We haven't thought of those exceptions. And
Right,
I think that's true of any project you do, but I think it's more so here because I think you're jumping two steps, right? Whereas prior, if you had that problem, you'd be like, oh, I have to code for that problem,
right,
right? Because
right,
there's
right. Much bigger investment. Right,
right. Because there's no system in the world that's just going to say, let me just put a workflow in, do this,
right,
right? You certainly can build a workflow and create exceptions, but you need to know about that prior. Here, like if somebody's like, oh, this is just the way I do it, and you code it into the AI, that's the way the AI is going to do it. And it's not going to have judgment until you give it judgment. And I think that's a scary piece because the second you lay off the people with the judgment and know your business, and you haven't connected those dots of that exception,
right.
you
You're at
could
risk.
you could really put your company at risk. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've run a few of these now, specifically, leveraging AI. Talk to me a little bit about what kind of resources you're using. I mean, are you hiring a whole ton of prompt engineers? Is it a combination of prompt engineer plus those internal
Yeah.
experts? How are you approaching that?
It's interesting. I've seen it a couple of different ways. One of the clients we worked with had one prompt engineer, and that was enough. Their technical team, I think that the cool thing about technical teams is always that they always lean in to the latest and greatest
Yeah, they
normally,
do.
right? Real technical, affectionately geeks will say,
Right? Yeah.
really want to uncover what's going on and they're really passionate about what they do. So I think AI does really break that barrier. I think the other piece of it is you don't need a large team to accomplish a lot, but you need a variety of skill sets. And what I mean by that is prompting is critical. So you really do need to know how to prompt. Either you need to learn how to do it if you're going to be using an AI, or you do need a prompt engineer who can create the safeguards you need. But I think, if you have the right people in the room, asking the right questions, documenting the right steps, then you don't need a large team. What I would say is you need a lot of validation. And that does
Yes,
take a larger audience to validate and the right
absolutely.
people to validate. And so, although I may not need 30 people in a conference room to do requirements gathering anymore, I do need 30 people to validate.
Yeah,
So, testing
absolutely.
almost
Absolutely.
becomes more
Testing
important.
and all of those people who, again, they've got the logic in their brain
Mhm.
somewhere. I want those people testing every single day.
Right. Yeah. And I think that to answer your question, I think it depends on the project, who you need. I think one, absolutely a prompt engineer or somebody who's familiar with prompting. I think two is people who are familiar with the large language models and the the potential differences or challenges with each model. I think all of us play with these different models, and we've leaned towards an affinity to one or the other. Like, I prefer Claude over GPT. I think some people like GPT for certain things and Claude for certain things. There's people like Perplexity for research or writing, or so. And I think it's weird. I think these LLMs, at least in my opinion, is they almost become specialized in that area in your mind,
Right.
even though it's
As
not true.
much
It
in
may
your
not
mind
true,
as
right?
in reality, of course. Yeah.
And so I think that's the other piece is I don't think anyone's going to be able to stay on top of the changes that happen in these LLMs. So I do think that, like any technology platform, you're going to make a decision and you're going to go with it. And that decision may create limitations for you. That limitation may be months versus in traditional software development years. I mean, if you think about, Salesforce and Oracle, and for those of us who worked for those companies, there's always a laundry list of feature functionality that people are asking. I was actually looking on LinkedIn today, and one of the women in product at Salesforce goes, hey, I'm getting a lot of feedback on this feature. And, when you do this, it automatically creates a list view, and the list view is automatic. And a lot of people don't like that. And then there's a laundry list of people saying, well, yeah, but it's automatic. But it's public, it's not private. And so they're having this entire conversation with admins on Salesforce on LinkedIn about this feature functionality, which is about creating list views. And I was like, okay, list views is like this in consideration of all the pieces of that application, right? And
But if
so,
it's a pain point for people, then
but when you think
it's
about it,
important.
is that in the AI world isn't even a conversation. Oh, you don't like that? Oh, you want to do it this way?
Right.
That's like
Tell
a
it
two
how you
second
want it to look.
fix.
Right.
That change, once they make that decision at Salesforce, is will it make it into the next release? We have 3 releases a year. So your pain point isn't going to be solved for potentially 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 months. Depends on where it falls in the pecking order, because there's only so much bandwidth, and that feature may not raise to the level of throughput. And so I think the difference with AI is you're getting this very iterative change, but you're still at the mercy of maybe my LLM isn't as sophisticated as that LLM, right?
Right.
And once you
Right.
kind of commit to an LLM, it's like committing to any other software. Like, you don't want to start changing it, right?
Right. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about how do you scale up? So you've designed, and now how do you amplify? How one AI becomes 10, and then we work it into
So on.
how does AI become a competitive advantage? Lessons
Yeah.
learned.
So I think that most customers, I think, haven't got to that rhythm yet, right? Uh it's referred to kind of as the AI factory, right? They haven't got to the point where it's becoming how their company operates. I think there are probably companies out there who have gotten to that point, particularly the companies we work with in the $1 to $2 billion range haven't. And so I think that I'll use the dirty word of governance. I think that's the first thing I'd put in place. But I think when people think of governance for AI, it has to be lightweight and iterative and quick, right? This is 3 things. It's, can I send it right through? Do I have to review it, or do I have to stop it? Sending it right through is no legal compliance data. Nothing's holding me back. Just go, guys. Move quickly. The others will be like, there might be a question here about illegal compliance. So a good issue in that is we had a client who wanted to use the AI to review resumes, to sort through resumes for a job. And legal's like, absolutely not, because you can't guarantee me that there is not bias built into that AI. And I think it's Greenhouse is one of the HR platforms who are currently in lawsuit because they can't prove it. Now, somebody can say, hey, you didn't hire me, or you didn't give me an interview because your AI told you for some reason not to. Well, how do you prove that you didn't code bias into the system, right? So there are some kind of funky use cases and edge cases like that, right? So I think that the governance framework is really there to protect, but to accelerate, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yep.
think
Exactly.
that to multiply it, it's also back to that use cases, right? So what's the roadmap, and how does the roadmap build upon itself? And I don't know that we have seen a great factory, to the point I said earlier, that says, I've built this agent and I'm going to keep on going. Now, what we've been working with a lot of clients is this concept of agents, right? So there is an agent that runs all these discrete things. Like I'm an agent, excuse me, who validates data. I'm an agent who goes and collects recordings. I'm the agent who goes and understands the research piece, right? So these agents are discrete, and then there's this like major agent who is executing that function. So I can call on any one of these sub agents whenever I want. So that model, I think, is starting to take hold a lot. And that agentic future is a lot better. But I think you have to develop that foundation in order to do that, right?
Right.
So I have to define, I want a research agent. I have to define, I want a data agent. I want a validation agent. I want a legal agent. I want, a chat agent, whatever. And then again, going back to this architecture thing, then you got to stitch it all together, right? You got to decide who's talking to whom and who's making
Right.
decisions and how does
Right.
that come
And then
forth,
how do I operationalize that in order to
right?
make sure that what is true today is true 3 weeks from now, 6 months from now?
Right. And so they talk a lot about what does the role of IT become. And I
Mm,
think that's truly part of the role that IT becomes is they become the policing of those agents, the validations of those agents, right? So as things change in the LLMs or in your AI software is, well, does that disturb the agent? Does the agent now get thrown off? Right. And it's just like any other job. Like if my leader came to me and said, hey, Rich, you're a great salesperson, but now I want you to go lean into marketing. And I want you to help marketing source who we should sell to because you know our customer base better than anybody. Well, I don't understand. I've never been a marketer. So now I got to lean into what is, a lead look like? What is, how do we message? Marketing is an art, not just a science. And I think, depending on your philosophy, sales is either an art or a science or both, right?
both.
Like we had with this guy at Dell who's like, I'd never use a CRM. It's complete art. It's complete art how we sell. And I was like,
Sure.
and
Uh-huh.
it's
That's what
science on
finance
how we
says
know
too.
whether you're successful.
Right.
So I think that there's pieces of this that as you get into this agentic world, to your point is, how do I know that agent's not going to fail? Or how do I know that I'm keeping pace with what the changes in the
The
business are
inputs.
doing?
Right.
And now I have to go
Or
back
the
and make
market, as the
sure.
market shifts and everything that I'm bringing in starts to shift, because it could be that my inputs are conversations and okay, market shift.
Totally. And I think that way of working is a new thought process. And I just don't know that everybody has gotten their mind wrapped around that yet. And I think like anything, the transformation that you'll go through, and I know it's funny, I was talking to somebody today and we're talking about the word transformation. And I was recalling the podcast with Jimmy, and it said how he kept on saying, well, let's redefine that. Let's redefine the term. And I said, we should redefine transformation as this iterative period in time in which I'm changing how my company operates, right?
Or my
And
process or my department or what
right,
it's, but it really is, the process is changing.
right.
Transformation. Yeah.
Right. And I think people see transformation and they get scared. It's big, it's expensive. But I think many transformations throughout your company that grow upon each other are really how you're going to get through AI. I don't know how you survive it if you think that this is like any other thing you've done before in terms of implementing a CRM. Like I think back to Dell when we first implemented Salesforce at Dell back in 2007, first ELA Salesforce had ever signed. And Dell's thing was we operate a $60 billion company off spreadsheets, basically. We have no single view of our pipeline across the organization. And our goal was to go implement Salesforce across the entire landscape of Dell's sales group, which is about 30,000 people, and get one single view of the pipeline. That was the goal, right? It took us 18 months to do that,
Right.
right?
And even then, adoption was probably not where you wanted it to be.
No. And we struggled, right? And we were very disciplined in what happened, how it happened, what that CRM looked like. But it still took us 18 months to do. And there wasn't a lot of quote unquote transformation about that because our goal was just to get the CRM system in. So we had 178 countries to get through. Hey guys, this is what the box looks like. You can't change that box unless it's legal or regulatory, period. Unless your country says this box doesn't work, you don't change the box, right? So sure, did we force everybody into standardization? Sure. Did we get a pipeline view? Sure. Did we transform the way sales works? No. Did we change fundamentally how it happened? No. But had we taken shorter bursts and said, hey, we're going to transform how the US sells, and then that model is going to be replicated in Europe and Asia, maybe it would have been different, but it would have taken 4 years to do,
That's exactly right. Yep.
right?
Yep. That's true. Transform. It's a small word. Small word. So
Right.
looking back, okay, what are your biggest lessons learned or your most important pieces of advice?
So I think lessons learned is I don't think it's scary, but I think it's disciplined, which is something most companies are not. So I would say lean into it, let people experiment, but have a process in which you can harness the information from people, right? Whether it's a governance console, whether it's a survey, whether it's we used to have community of practices at Accenture, in which leaders from across a practice would get together and talk through what they were seeing at different clients and how that would inform either our delivery model or how we went and solved problems. So, however you as a company or your culture kind of connects, I think it's really important. When we were with this Vibe Fest we're doing with Atlas, one of the questions that came up in the kickoff from one of the women was, should we be working with our peers? Because you're asking me to take on this piece, but I might be dependent on them. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You absolutely should break down those barriers. So I think that, the lesson learned is this isn't your grandmother's, transformation, right? Think like it's 2050, not like it's
Yeah.
1999,
Yeah.
right?
And then take the risk.
And take the risk. And I think companies need to tell people this is a safe space to fail. Like, we know this is cutting edge. We know we're changing things. So let's try things because we can really quickly, and let's break it. But you also need a way to elevate that information, right? So if I, as an individual, figure out something that works really well, how am I telling and who am I telling, right? Am I going to the CIO and telling them? And are they going to say, yeah, I got a roadmap along. I don't care what you think. Or am I going to a transformation? They have AI roles now across AI transformation roles, or, AI, the chief AI officer, all these roles are popping up. Who do I tell? How do I share this information? So I think that's a big piece of it from a lesson learned. I think that people also need to figure out, like we've talked throughout this podcast about, is what is this actually become? I think there has to be an end state vision about the transformation, because you're going to hit different inflection points, and those inflection points are going to, make or break it. And I just think through all the times we've done a large scale implementation and you finish and you get it into steady state and the business is running. And then a new leader comes in and says, why'd you do that? And then they scrap it all and you start with something different. I think that way of thinking has to end. And I think people have to think of the evolution and the iterative nature. And although this may not work, how can I change it without breaking everything I've built?
Nice. Nice. I love it. This has been super, super interesting. I think big takeaways is you don't have just alone. And so I'm
No.
going to shout out to ourselves. We've got an assessment
Yeah.
on this, but we also love this topic.
Yeah.
And so, if anybody makes it to the end of this podcast, then pick up the phone and call us, because we would love to just, hear what the challenges are that you're working with, and put some brainstorming work together, because we're all figuring this out as it goes. And it's a really fun topic.
Yeah. Yeah. This was good to just kind of get this all out, because I think, to your point, everybody's struggling with this. Everybody has a point of view. And the more kind of three-dimensional you make the model, the better you're going to kind of look at the different phases and know where you're going to be successful and where you're not. And, to the point of the AI assessment that we built, is that's exactly what it's intended to do. Is we've talked about a lot of things. You'd go crazy if you try to tackle them all. So there are natural things in the maturity of your company in which you are really good at and you have really strong talent to go address. And then there are places where the talent does not exist or the ideas or you can't harness that. That's where you should start. And that's where you should, to your point, hire people like us to go help you do that. Cool. Well, until next time, we will leave the listeners with this and talk soon.
Yeah.
All
Or
right.
tomorrow.
Or tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.